All right, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kristen Brooks, Executive Director with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project, and we are delighted to have you on behalf of our team. We welcome you today to part 4 of our series for paraeducators, and we are excited to have Drs. Melora Tomeno and Edward Miguel joining us today, and you guys are going to love this presentation. So we have partnered with these two for quite some time and are just thrilled that they continue on this journey with us, and it would not be possible without our partners, with Kevin Schaefer, Director in El Dorado, and our team members and his group, as well as our folks down in Riverside County and our partners at the California Department of Education. So we are thrilled to be here today with you, and I don't want to take any more time. We are recording and archiving this, so if you miss any portion of it, you can go back and rewatch it, and our team will drop in the chat. We have Don and Juliet joining us today as well, supporting behind the scenes. So if you need anything at all, please be sure to put any questions either in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll be monitoring those throughout today's session. So you'll get a chance to go ahead and access that Padlet link that has previous webinars, recordings, and resources, and then we'll be adding to those as we go through this 8-part series. So we're lucky to have Eddie and Melora with us the next 3 sessions. So each of these portions will connect to one another, and enjoy the show.
All right, thank you, Kristen, and thank you everybody at Supporting Inclusive Practices, and thank you for having us, and thank you for everybody that's watching. I think that's so important that it shows just your initiation and wanting to learn more, and that's something that we value so much. So thank you for being here, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about behavior supports and how to be proactive in getting ahead of your students' challenging behaviors in the classroom. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of what we're going to be covering. We're going to be talking about behavior supports and what those are. We're going to be talking about applied behavior analysis because all of our behavior supports are grounded in that theory. We're going to be talking about challenging behaviors, about the 3-term contingency under which we examine the behaviors. Then we're going to move into understanding the function of each behavior and what the functions are, and then different supports and strategies that we can use to reduce the likelihood of seeing those behaviors in your classroom. And then we are going to jump into some questions. The entire presentation has some polling questions and some chat questions embedded in it. So this is meant to be very engaging. We want you guys engaged and interacting with us throughout the presentation. So please use your chat feature and answer all the polling questions as well. All right, so I'll turn it over to Edward for behavior supports.
So the biggest question and why we were tasked with this presentation is, we need to answer what are behavior supports. And in short, behavior supports are evidence-based practices or strategies that are implemented in an effort to encourage skill acquisition while decreasing the likelihood that challenging behavior may occur. The processes or the strategies that we're going to be showing with you are strictly derived from the science of applied behavior analysis. I want to make something really clear as we go into this. This is not a response protocol. This is a proactive protocol. Behavior supports exist to support students in exhibiting what we have determined are their replacement behaviors or more social behaviors. So it's important that we embed behavior supports proactively in anticipation of the challenging behavior occurring if we don't embed those supports. Next slide. So what is ABA? Since this is grounded in applied behavior analysis, it is helpful to know that ABA is the science in which tactics derived from the principles of behavior are applied systematically to improve socially significant behavior, and experimentation is used to identify the variables responsible for change. This is the only empirically validated intervention for individuals with autism. Again, socially significant behavior. So this is another thing. You come from an array of different classrooms where there are different standards, social standards that need to be met. So what's socially significant for a particular age group or a particular classroom in one classroom may not be socially significant in another. It's important to understand that social significance or anything that can impede the child from accessing their peers or accessing the classroom curriculum. Next slide. So what is challenging behavior? I think when we hear the term challenging behavior, we go right to the extreme. And yes, challenging behavior does involve the extremes of self-injury, aggression, but it also involves simple things like inability to sit in a seat, to attend to class, to complete simple steps or directions. It's important that we target these challenging behaviors when they're at that lower end of the spectrum before they evolve into something that might be more severe. Next slide.
So when looking at challenging behavior, I think oftentimes when we're working directly with the students and we're the ones getting hit or spit on or kicked, it's really difficult to understand that that behavior isn't intended to hurt you or to try and incite injury. And so I found this quote: "What we sometimes see as a failure to behave properly is actually a failure to communicate properly." And I think this is so important when we're looking at challenging behaviors and conceptualizing it, in understanding that these students need a more effective way to communicate. And we're going to be talking about that along with other strategies, but those are all the behavior supports we need to embed to allow the student to have alternate behaviors so that they can communicate properly instead of behaving in a way that is potentially harmful. Next slide. So when looking at the challenging behavior, we always have to use a lens of a 3-term contingency. So we can't just look at the behavior in isolation. We have to be aware all the time, and we have to be scientists, and we have to look at the variables that are occurring before a behavior and the variables that are occurring after a behavior to know how to accurately treat the actual behavior. And so we do that through a 3-term contingency called an ABC contingency. So the A is the antecedent. So this is what's occurring immediately prior to a behavior. Then the behavior occurs, so the actual behavior, and then there's a consequence. So what happens immediately after the behavior? I think something really important here is immediately after the behavior. So sometimes we think, okay, this student had a behavior, and then time passes and then I took away their iPad. Well, that taking away the iPad wasn't the consequence for the behavior. It's what immediately happened after the behavior. So we can use an example. An antecedent could be a teacher or the paraeducator placing a demand on the student then going into an outburst behavior, and the consequence is the task is removed. So then in that example, not that that's what we would do, but in that example, we reinforced the behavior. But you can see how we need to be viewing behaviors as a continuum on this 3-term contingency and not just as the outburst. We have to look what happened before the outburst and what happened after the outburst to know what behavior supports we need in the future to reduce the likelihood of it occurring. Next slide. So we're going to practice a little bit because this is really important. I know it sounds simple, but to start viewing your classroom in this way and constantly being alert of all of the variables that are occurring in the environment is really important. So we're going to watch a video clip right now of Edward and his dog, Oliver. And I want you guys to be looking for the antecedent, the actual behavior, and then the consequence of the behavior. So next slide. And we can play the video. Next slide. Okay, so in the chat, please tell me first the antecedent. What was the antecedent in this situation? Awesome. Yes, so the ring and the opening of the cookie jar. And I would definitely say that the ring, because that's what the dog would have heard. So that's awesome. So the sound of the cookie jar opening. So next, what was the behavior? Awesome. The dog walked to the cookie jar. And then what was the consequence? He got the treat. The dog got the treat. Awesome. Good job, you guys. So that is how you should be viewing all behavior that occurs in your classroom, and positive behavior too. If the teacher walks to the front of the class and starts the lesson, and then the student raises their hand and then is called on, that is also viewed as a 3-term contingency. So the teacher starting the lesson would be the antecedent, the student raising their hand was the behavior, and being called on was the consequence. So it doesn't just have to be negative behavior that we view this way, it should be all behavior. So this is just an example data sheet that we use at our school. It's just a really easy way to chart the antecedent and the behavior and the consequence without having to do a lot of manual work or writing. So there's different boxes that you can check, and then writing down what the exact behavior is, and then indicating what the consequence is. And what you do is you take this type of data for several occurrences of the behavior, and then you start looking for trends. And those trends are going to tell you why your student is engaging in the behavior that they are. So let's go to the next slide. So the why, like why is this behavior occurring, that we would gather from our antecedent behavior consequence analysis, is going to tell us, again, the why, or what we call the function of the behavior. And there's 4 functions that we need to be aware of and pretty much master, and master being able to identify them. And those 4 functions are escape, attention, access, or automatic. Next slide. Oh, okay, no, this is right. I'm sorry. So polling question 1. Kristen, you can change the slide, yeah. So we're gonna do a polling question right now. So I wanna know, why is it important to know the function of each behavior? So A, it tells us what the student is trying to communicate. B, it guides what interventions are used or should be used. C, so that you can change the function. D, A and B, or E, A and C. And we'll go ahead, you don't have to put this in the chat. We actually have a polling question that we can run.
We have about 1/3 of us who voted, so we'll give it a few more seconds.
Yeah. Keep them coming in. This is awesome. Thank you guys. We're at 155. Can we get to 200? All right, it's slowing down quite a bit. So the correct answer is A and B. So D would have been the correct answer. And that is the one that the majority of you voted for. So if we can close the polling, and then I'll go through each of the answers. Can we close it, or? I don't think we can. Oh, perfect. Okay. So like I said, the answers that are correct are A and B. So A, it tells us what the student is trying to communicate. So yes, they're either trying to tell us that they don't want to do the work, or that they need our attention, or that they need something. So behavior, like in that quote that we shared, is always an attempt to communicate something. And the behavior is shaped over a period of time because it gets the learner what they need. So we have to change that and teach them a new skill to get what they need. So that's why A is correct. B is correct because it guides what intervention is used. An example that I love to use for this, I go into classrooms so often and I say, well, what's the intervention for this behavior? And let's just say it's a escape maintain behavior. So the student does not want to do their work, and so they engage in the behavior. And the paraeducator tells me, well, it's on extinction. And I say, well, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, I'm ignoring it. And then my immediate question is, well, what's the function? And if they tell me escape, then I say extinction's not planned ignoring. It's one type of extinction. We're not going to get into all that today, but ignoring a behavior that is escape maintained is not appropriate. So you would only ignore a behavior, A, if it's safe, and B, if the function is attention. Because if I'm a student and I'm trying to get out of doing my work, and my paraeducator, I'm having an outburst, they present me my task, I start having an outburst, and my paraeducator just starts ignoring me, guess what happened? I got exactly what I wanted. I am no longer having to do my work. It is easier for me to have the behavior and be left alone than to do my work. So it's not a match. It's not an appropriate intervention. So the intervention has to match the function, which is why knowing the function is so, so critical to intervening on behavior. So that is why A and B are correct. C is not correct because we as interventionists cannot change the function. The individual themselves, they determine what the function is. We can shape our intervention to give them more appropriate behaviors to do to meet that same function, but we as the interventionists cannot change the function. All right, next slide. Okay, so what do the functions tell us? Now that we know why it's important to identify them, what are they? So escape, like I kind of talked about, escape would be the student is trying to get away or avoid something. So that could be something as obvious as you give them the task, they don't want to do the task, and so they have a behavior so they don't have to engage in the task. That's the obvious one. But you have to think more critically and look at what's going on in the environment because it's not always that clear. It could be the lighting in the classroom. Some students can't stand the bright white lights that we have in the classroom, and they might be having an outburst because when they do, they get removed from the class in the natural sunlight, which is much more calming to them. It can be something like the bell ringing on campus, a noise that another student is making. All of these things they might be trying to get away from, and that would be an escape maintained behavior. Our next function is attention. And this would be that the student is trying to gain the attention of somebody. So let's say you're working in a classroom and you're not the student's dedicated one-to-one, but the student really has great rapport with you and they want your attention. And every time they start to act out, your teacher says, can you go help Johnny? Well, Johnny has learned that when I want my paraeducator, who's my favorite person in the world, to come over to me and comfort me, I have to engage in this behavior. So that would be the attention function. The next function is access. So this is that the student is trying to get something or somewhere. So they're trying to get their favorite toy, their iPad, to their favorite area of the classroom. So they'll engage in the challenging behavior if they know that it's going to get them that item. And then finally, and the most difficult part, or the most difficult function in my opinion, is if a behavior is automatically reinforced, or if the function is automatic. So what this means is that engaging in the behavior in and of itself is reinforcing. So there's no external variable controlling the function. It's just that doing the behavior feels good. And there's two types of automatic. So there's sensory. So like if you can imagine some of those classic autism symptoms like the flapping or the rocking, if you ask a student who's able to report on their own behavior, they'll tell you it just feels good. That's why I do it. It feels good. And that's an example of automatic. The other one is pain attenuation. So a lot of the times, like students that have self-injurious behavior and like they'll hit themselves, digging deeper into it, you'll find, well, they were constipated and what they're doing is they're basically transferring pain. So by engaging in the behavior, it makes them feel less pain somewhere else or alleviates the pain that they were feeling. So those are the 4 functions that you should become very, very familiar with. Next slide. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna watch the videos and we're gonna try and identify the function together. And we do have polling questions for each of these. I just saw in the chat to slow down. I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast. This is being recorded, so you can always go back and watch also, but I will also slow down.
I think you should plan on going back. I mean, this is going to be a lot of content. And I think also once you get back into practice, especially in an in-person environment, I would highly recommend going back and reviewing the content and even reaching out if you have questions.
Absolutely. We have our contact for you at the end, and you always can reach out. We're a resource for you always. Okay, so in our first video, we're going to be looking to see what the function is. And again, don't put your answer in the chat. We have another polling question for you guys after. All right, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, let's watch it one more time because this one's a kind of tricky one.
Yes.
Okay, so let's open the polling question. And just because you guys probably can't understand her language as well as us that know her, she said, I want those chips, and then did stuff. So what is the function of the behavior? A, attention, B, escape, C, access, or D, automatic? Thank you to everybody who's responding. This is awesome. All right, so we're at about 161 of you. So access, yes, is the right answer. So what happened in the video, she asked for the chips, and then what the teacher was trying to do was get her to say the whole thing. But because she wasn't getting the chips right away, she hit herself. And then we were gonna not give them to her for that, but that's what happened in the video. So she wanted the chips, didn't get them, and hit herself in the face. All right. Next slide. And then you can pass this one. Can we close this polling question?
Yeah, you just close it on your screen. It should be closed on everybody else's. If they...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so let's watch this next video now.
Right? We're gonna do some math. All right, look at, we're gonna pick two things from the shopping list that we're gonna buy. All right? You wanna pick? You wanna buy the Lay's chips? Good choice. What else? And Cheez-Its. Nice choice. All right, listen. So the chips are 50 cents.
All right, so we'll open the polling question. So what was the function here? The behavior was him reaching to grab her hair. All right, we're still going. All right, so we're at about 170 respondents, and escape came out as the winner at 64% of votes. And yes, that is correct. Escape was the function here. So when she started to write the problem down to place the demand, he reached over to grab her hair. So he was engaging in the behavior to escape the demand that was placed. All right, next slide. Yep, okay. I'm so sorry for those of you that your videos aren't working. We, again, when you get the recording, I think it should be better.
Time's up. More? Okay, you can have more.
Do you want to play that one more time?
Yeah, I was talking.
Time's up. More? Okay, you can have more.
All right, so we'll open up the polling question again.
This is like watching a horse race.
All right, this is interesting. So depending on what you viewed as the behavior, then yes, I can see how the polling question was split that way. So our intent was that the rocking was the behavior, in which case the function would be automatic because he had everything he wanted in front of him. He had his person that he really liked and had great rapport with sitting next to him, and he was still rocking, meaning that engaging in the behavior in and of itself was what was reinforcing. I see a lot of you wrote access. If the reason that you put access is because he took his picture icon and exchanged it with his staff, then yes, the behavior of communicating, the function of that would be access, yes. But we were envisioning the behavior in this video to be the rocking, but I can see what you mean. If the behavior was the picking up the card and handing it over, then yes, access would be correct as well. All right, next slide. All right, and here's our last video, and I think my favorite. I hope you guys like it as much as I do.
Lewis, mom, mommy, mama, what? Hi.
So yeah, I just saw someone's chat. My kids did that to me totally. Like if you're a parent, you totally get this clip and are probably cracking up also, like I do every time I watch it. All right, so polling question, what was the function?
And the responses are faster this time too. We need more cartoons.
Awesome. So yes, the function is attention. A few of you did access, and there is a lot of talk in the field. So access to a person is attention. So if that's why you put access, then yeah, if you wanted access to his mom, but that is attention. It's a kind of a very fine line, but yes, it was to get his mom's attention because as soon as he got it, he laughed, he got what he wanted, and he ran away. All right. Next slide. Okay, so now what? What do we do now? So the first thing you want to do is look at the ABCs and try and figure out what the function is. Then once you know the function, you're going to start looking at what behavior supports you want to implement and how. The how is a little bit trickier because depending on the function, like I was explaining earlier, is going to depend on how you implement those things. But the important things for you guys to know are what strategies are available to you. And then you're going to want to talk with your BCBA or your school psychologist or your teacher and like, okay, so this is what I think the function is. This is why the student's engaging in the behavior. I know how to do these things. So what is the plan? So let's talk about what some of those strategies are. Next slide. So the ones that we're going to cover today, and this is not an exhaustive list. In an hour, there's just not enough time to cover everything. And so what we wanted to do is give you guys some of the most useful and most effective strategies that we have found in our work with students with severe challenging behaviors. So, and those are functional communication, reinforcement, prompting, chaining and task analysis, visual support, token economy, and sensory diet. Next slide. So Edward's going to talk a little bit about functional communication.
So functional communication is a means of effectively communicating to get one's wants and needs met. This is going to vary depending on the student and their ability or what they utilize, whether it's a communication device or whether it's verbal, whether it's exchanging PECs, and it's relative to that situation. What's important is that regardless of students' abilities or how they communicate, that functional communication be present and in their presence. That means that if they have a communication device, just because they're going to recess doesn't mean the device doesn't go with them. That it's always there so that they can communicate their wants and needs. When a need is not met, we may see challenging behavior. And usually that relates to the fact that they weren't either prompted to utilize communication to meet their needs or that they were unable to use communication to meet their needs. So here's some examples for using functional communication for each behavioral function. Escape, teach the student to request a break. Attention, teach the student to say, "Excuse me," or to tap nicely on the shoulder. Or raise hand is another one. Access, teach the student to request what they want or need. And then automatic, teach them scripts and work on spontaneous language. But something that's often missed, at least in my experience with functional communication, is the creation of opportunities throughout the day in order for the student to practice this. In order for them to use it when they're upset, it has to be a habit. So even when you're walking down the hall, engaging with the student on their device and just saying, "How are you? Are you having a good day? Do you like the color of that banner?" Those types of exchanges. And the more exchanges in functional communication we get throughout each day or throughout each classroom period, the more likely they're going to utilize functional communication when they are escalated.
I just want to add too, oftentimes we think functional communication, we think verbal communication. So if your student is nonverbal, all of these things still apply, and it can be as simple as having a big green break icon on their desk that they hand to you if they need a break. And as Eddie was saying, practicing those skills before they're upset, that is called positive practice. It's an actual intervention, and you want to practice that skill before they're upset so that it gets into their behavioral repertoire. Because when we're escalated, we often know our cognition goes down. So you want to practice, practice, practice.
And those practice sessions also give you an indication of the likelihood that they're going to engage in functional communication when or before a behavior occurs. If they're not responsive during those opportunities, then you can bet that they're not going to ask you for a break, for example, when they're upset. So that tells you, okay, I need to reteach this in a certain way so that they have a higher probability of answering. Next slide.
Okay. So when we teach some of those skills to replace the challenging behavior, and we were starting to teach these new, more appropriate skills, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing those skills. So there's two types of reinforcement. There's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And if this gets confusing, please email me. I have different charts that I can give, or I can put them in the Padlet. We just, again, didn't have time to dig too deep into it. But positive reinforcement occurs when a behavior is immediately followed by the presentation of a stimulus that increases the future frequency of the behavior in similar conditions in the future. So I'm going to give an example. And what makes it positive reinforcement is the presentation of a stimulus. Okay. In negative reinforcement, it's the removal. So let's go back to positive. So let's see here. We're trying to teach Johnny, instead of blurting out in class, I know. Instead of doing that, we're trying to teach him to raise his hand. So he wants the attention of his teacher. So the teacher's doing her lesson, he knows the answer, and he raises his hand. The teacher calling on him, she's presenting the stimulus, she's giving him the mic, essentially, is positive reinforcement. She's positively reinforcing what he's doing. Or let's say he raises his hand and his aide gives him a little piece of his favorite chocolate for raising his hand. She's giving him something for doing the behavior that she wanted him to do, knowing that he liked what he's getting, so that that behavior, raising the hand, is going to increase in the future. Negative reinforcement occurs when behavior is followed immediately by the removal of a stimulus that's going to increase the future frequency of the behavior in similar conditions. So an example of this, the kid hates being in class. It's loud, the lights, everything, he just can't stand it. But he has to go to class. He's in school, he's got to be in the classroom. So he's in the classroom and he demonstrated positive behavior and he was attending to the lesson for 3 minutes. And then the teacher takes him out of the classroom. That taking him out of the classroom was negative reinforcement. So they reinforced his attending for 3 minutes by removing him or removing all the negative stimuli that he doesn't like. So what's important to remember here is that reinforcement, whether positive or negative, is always going to increase the rate of the behavior. All right, next slide.
And Melora, we had a question in a chat about just simply acknowledging raising the hand is also positive reinforcement because it's adding a stimulus, it's adding that verbal praise.
If
right?
the student likes verbal praise, oftentimes we have to condition praise. Verbal praise is not what we call a primary reinforcer. So primary reinforcers are all of those things that we are born with, born being reinforced by: food, water, shelter. So praise, sometimes kids could care less. So you have to sometimes condition it. But yes, if the kid is motivated by verbal praise, absolutely saying good job for raising your hand is definitely a reinforcer. All right. Oh, video, watch, find.
Here, we will be working with a student on a math goal. So before I start the goal, I will do a preference assessment to see what he is working for and to make sure he is motivated. What are you working for? Cookies or chips? Which one? Cookies? Cookies? Okay, put your feet down. Look, we need 2 more tokens for cookies, okay? All right, we're gonna do some math. He will be choosing 2 items from the shopping list, and then I will be telling him the prices of the 2 items, and I will write them down on the board, and he would have to use a calculator to add the 2 together. And Cheez-Its, nice choice. All right, listen. So the chips are 50 cents. So while I was attempting to begin the goal, he did attempt to engage in a physical aggression towards me. So I evaded that and prompted him to use functional communication to request for a break from the demand. Yeah. Be careful. Good job asking for a break, Aiden. He's doing very well in the school.
Okay, so we're gonna do the answer for this in the chat. I just saw that I didn't have a polling question there. So he was doing his work, started to get escalated, making his noises, started to engage in the behavior. He was redirected to use his functional communication. So what type of reinforcement was he given for functionally communicating that he needed a break? Was it positive or negative? So more specifically, if let's consider, those of you that are saying positive reinforcement, I'm guessing that you're him saying, or his staff saying, good job asking for a break. I'm guessing that's why you're saying positive. What was actually him being able to get on the break? Was that positive or negative? Good, yeah. So him being removed from the task, or the task being removed from him, and him being allowed to take a break would be an example of negative reinforcement, because he didn't want to be doing his work. He tried to engage in the behavior. We're not going to reinforce that. So we redirect him to ask for a break. when he appropriately asked, the task was removed and he was able to take a break. So that is negative reinforcement. All right, next slide.
So just to kind of capture that too. So the goal here then is that he sees the effort and reward formula, okay? It's much easier to ask for a break than it is to engage in challenging behavior. And over time, that becomes less and less and less. And just for context, this was a student that could only be in the classroom for 30 seconds at a time. And we built that up to 6 hours. All right, so it does work. And if you tune into our data collection talk, you'll definitely see that how we can sort of help you track that so you can really see that kind of progress. All right, so prompting. The definition of prompting is providing assistance or cues to encourage the use of a specific skill. There are different types of prompting. There's obviously physical or hand-over-hand prompting, gestural prompting, modeling what you expect, and then a verbal prompt. Now, Ms. Melora is back from her chat session.
I was just answering a chat. I think it's important to bring up. So someone said, could this be confusing to the child to give them a break after they engage in immediately after they engage in the behavior? They didn't give them a break for the behavior. Remember one of the first slides in that ABC, the consequence is what immediately follows the behavior. Immediately following the behavior, he went to pull her hair, and just for more context, this for him is like a level 1 behavior. This is barely anything. So at this point, we redirect to an appropriate behavior that he has been taught. He has been taught to ask for a break. So we prompt him to ask for that break, and then the task is then removed. Later on, when we've shaped his behavior more and he has a longer history of performing this behavior of asking for the break, yes, you could say, okay, one more problem, then break. But that would be later on down the road. And if there's any more questions on that or any more confusion, again, please just reach out. Okay, so the next strategy that you guys can be using before behaviors even occur is what we call chaining and task analysis. So with our students learn in chunks. So whereas a typically developing child, potentially you could just say, oh, watch mommy wash her hands, and then the learner knows how to wash their hands. Our students need things broken down for them. So chaining is a way to do that. You're chaining smaller skills together to perform a larger skill. And how that is taught is through something called a task analysis. And this visual here is an example of a task analysis. So you're going to teach each skill one at a time. There is forward chaining to teach this task analysis, backward chaining to teach this task analysis, or total task presentation. So forward chaining would be if I started with the first step. So the first step that I'm going to teach towards independence is turn on the water. And then I'm going to prompt everything else. I'll prompt getting hands wet, prompt getting soap, prompt rinsing, prompt turning off, and prompt drying hands. That would be forward chaining. And then next I would do turn water and wet hands independently, prompt everything else. Then turn water, wet hands, use soap, everything else is prompted. Okay, that's forward. Backward is the opposite. So backward chaining, I use a lot with tying shoes. I do everything for the kid, and all they have to do first is tighten it. And then they do the last 2 steps, and then they do the last 3 steps. In this example on the screen, I would have them dry their hands independently first, and everything else is prompted. Then I would have them dry hands and turn off the water and prompt all the initial steps. Okay. Total task presentation is used if your student during baseline data, they're able to say wet their own hands, rinse their hands off, and dry their hands. You're going to allow them to do those 3 independently, and you're going to prompt the others until they master them. So that is what total task presentation is. Okay, so let's go to our next polling question. So when teaching a student to brush their teeth, what step would you target first for independence if you were using backward chaining? And we can open up the poll. So it's A, put brush in mouth, B, put toothbrush down and rinse mouth, C, any step that the student already performed, or D, get the toothbrush. Remember, we're doing backward chaining. All right, so the majority of you guys did say put toothbrush down and rinse your mouth. So yes, for backward chaining, you're gonna get the last step of the chain independently. For those of you that said total task, or that said any step that they do already independently, that's total task presentation. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so visual supports, and visual supports are really important because not only does it remind the student what's expected or give them an opportunity to refer to what's expected, it also reminds you of what you've communicated that's expected. For example, if you use a first then card, which is right there in the middle, if I give a student an expectation, for example, first complete your math assignment, then you get a break, then it's much harder to pull back from that. But what it also does is it allows you, because you have that visual there, you can also just gesture towards the expectation as opposed to reiterate verbally what your expectation is. Another good strategy is having single icons for things like simple one-step directives or even for things like breaks, okay? I also like using them to cue students to stop behaviors or lower their voice. These are all things that are going to be relative to what each of your students do, but I would imagine that many of your students could use some type of visual support that either mimics the classroom schedule, like you see here in the visual schedule, or that gives them prompts for how you want them to perform during a particular activity or setting.
So we have a video now to demonstrate how to effectively use a first then strip.
What are we working for? Give it to me. Like first walk, then copy.
And then she put the reinforcer as the then. So first walk, then talkies.
What's nice for these students that have first then strips is it really allows them to clear up any uncertainties or any maybe internal anxiety they're having about when they're going to get something. And if we always follow through on that, then that we're able to sort of minimize that anxiety. Next slide.
All right. Token economies are used a lot. I also see them being used incorrectly a lot. So we're going to cover this quickly, but I'll tell you why they're incorrect sometimes. So what it is it's a system whereby individuals earn generalized, conditioned, that's the important word here, conditioned reinforcers. So like token, a ticket, a sticker, a star, as an immediate consequence for specific behaviors. Individuals accumulate tokens and exchange them then for a larger item or the actual reinforcer. So like the OT room swing is a big one at our school. So they have to earn, say, 5 pennies and then they get the OT room swing. Token economies are not effective unless the tokens are conditioned to be reinforcing. So when you first introduce a token board, you have to pair the tokens with something else the student likes. So oftentimes it's like a token and a little piece of an Oreo, or a token, and if they like verbal praise, the token and the praise, until the student realizes these tokens are reinforcing. And that's what's often done incorrectly is they don't view the tokens. So many of our students' tasks, right, are taking something and putting it on something, taking something and putting it on with Velcro. It oftentimes just becomes another task if we don't condition the tokens.
And the reason that Melora is sharing this with you is not that as paraeducators, you would necessarily be expected to condition these reinforcers, but we're telling this so that you can ask the question. You get something, you're working with the student, you know them very well, and then someone comes in with a plan. One of the questions you should ask is, has this been conditioned, or are we going to condition it? Okay, the last thing that we want to do is have you set up for failure with an unconditioned token economy that basically just is meaningless in terms of improving rates of behavior.
Okay, so now we're going to watch a video of a token economy being implemented where the tokens were already conditioned.
4 more tokens. Which one should we do first? Box. Okay, perfect. We're going to spell box. You do. Oh my goodness, good job, bud. What did you spell? Box. Good job. Hey, I love the way that you worked and you spelled box. Good job. Hey, how many more do you need?
1, 2, 3.
3 more. Good job, bud. So we are supposed to lay out 5 vowels and 5 consonants, and we're supposed to lay out the letters in front of him. Which one should we do next?
Bed.
Bed. Awesome. Let's do bed.
You can probably stop this video. The important thing was just in the delivery of the token, and then she gave very specific what he did well when she gave the token. And then when he earns all of those tokens, he will get what is on the board, which I can't really see, but I think he's a Takis kid too. So I think it's one of his Takis little chip things. All right, next slide.
All right, so one of the biggest resources, and I say this I learned this a while ago when I was a one-on-one paraeducator, and this was really important for us to share with you because it's something that I think that is underrepresented in students' programs, and that's the sensory diet. It's specially designed to reach baseline. Okay, now we know that we get kids that come in the morning and they're slow and they're groggy and they're slow to respond, and then we get kids that come in that are so hyper and excited and you can't get them to sit still. Sensory diets are designed to work for both of those situations, but they have to be implemented systematically. Activities that are part of the sensory diet can occur before, during, or outside of instruction. Activities should be prescribed based on students' arousal level under the guidance of an occupational therapist. The reason I'm making you aware of this is because it exists, okay? And these are activities that we can have a student do if they're under aroused or if they're over aroused. And we actually have a very helpful video that we'll be sharing with you in a moment that will kind of give you a visual of what we mean. But let's get some examples. So if a student is under aroused, they're sleepy, they're unable to focus, alerting activities such as bouncing on a ball or swinging on a platform swing are introduced. If a student is over aroused, they're hyperactive, unable to sit still, calming activities should be introduced. Things like deep pressure, bubbles, a weighted vest or a blanket, or some sort of tactile activity. If you look at it as a spectrum, and the left is under arousal and the right is over arousal, we want them right in the middle, okay? And so when you do these activities, if they're over aroused, you want to bring them down. If they're under aroused, you want to bring them up. So think about that in your mind as you watch this video.
This is a demonstration of a student doing a sensory diet. He's starting with the staff doing alerting activities. You can see this is alerting. He's having to pay a lot of attention to stay on the ball. With his balance, he had to visually focus on what he was throwing. And with the sensory diets, this is something that the staff follows every day. The student could be having it twice a day, up to maybe every 20 minutes. A student has a sensory diet, and the sensory diet is to help the student regulate to get to that just right ability to be learning. The student is still continuing a sensory diet This is his second alerting activity, and students usually have between 3 and 5 alerting activities. And so it's, again, the fast movement. Now the student is transitioning to the calming portion of a sensory diet. And you can notice that he's moving slow. He's pulling on the TheraBand, but nothing is quick or jerky that would alert him. This is all slow, soothing types of movement. Okay, our student is doing a second calming activity. And this is called the sled. And there's a lot of resistance. He has weights. The sled is very heavy, plus he added weights. So he's getting a lot of input. And all that muscle work is very calming. Heavy muscle work calms the whole body.
Okay. So you're gonna pick them up and put them in the container.
This is an example of doing the sensory diet in the classroom. And our student is getting a lot of alerting activity here. He's bending down, reaching up. Now he's standing up and bending down. So there's a lot of movement there, but he's still staying at his desk, and you don't need to go to the OT room.
Okay, we're gonna do 10 of those. So count for me. 1.
This is another example of a sensory activity for alerting that you can do in the classroom.
3.
He's getting a lot of movement here. He's getting pressure on his hands and the clapping where he has to be alert. You don't need to go to the OT room for this. Okay, now the student has done his alerting activities, and now we want to get him back down and do some calming activities. This is a great activity to do at the student's desk. A lot of the students have their own therapy. So he's taking little beads and he's pulling them out. So he's using a lot of pressure. So you again think of the deep bear hug, but it's for his hands. He's actually tensing up his arms all the way. So he's getting a lot of heavy muscle work there for a calming activity. Our student is doing his second calming activity. He's doing counting, which sometimes can help with regulation. He's pushing, and it's all a lot of heavy work while he's doing the movement. So again, he's using his muscles, so it's really calming for him.
10.
All right, so that was a demonstration of, some of the things that we do around our campuses. And, there is definitely a lot more to it. If you visualize your classrooms, and as we continue this presentation, if you wouldn't mind, as you visualize your classroom, putting in the chat box, what do you have available that can be a part of a sensory diet?
For the sake of time too, we'll just move to the next slide and we'll monitor the chat just so we have a better idea of what resources you have for future presentations also. All right, so how does it all work? And let's kind of try and put it all together now as we wrap up. So again, like we started, all of these strategies are intended to be proactive. So before the behavior is even occurring. This is why our jobs as paraeducators, and we've both been paraeducators, direct line staff, and on days, if a staff calls out sick, we still are. So we see you, we hear you, we know what you're doing. And it's so important to all day be engaged. When your student is being good, engage, engage, engage. Don't wait until they have a behavior to go up to them and start engaging and using these strategies. These should be being used all day. It's hard work. We've got hard jobs, you guys. So they're intended guidelines as a proactive use to reduce the likelihood of challenging behavior occurring and to engage and to increase engagement, Remember, more engaged students are going to demonstrate less behavior. So you want to know your student. You want to look at all of the ABCs and try and determine a trend so that you can identify the function and then plan ahead. And again, I just want to emphasize, you're going to want to be talking to your teacher, your school psychologist, your school's BCBA, in developing what that plan is based on what you know about your student, their ABCs, and their function.
I just want to wrap up too by saying that paraeducators are my favorite people in the world. What we do in our careers is to benefit the paraeducators that have come after us. And, the reality is that teachers and direct service providers alike would not be as successful without you. So all of this is really foundational behavior support knowledge that you can expand upon in order to feel and be more effective in the classroom. Definitely don't be afraid to ask questions, okay? And in terms of, building on the next training on data collection will help you a lot with analyzing and understanding what behavior supports you can utilize for your students.
All right, next slide. We know we hit you with a lot today, and I know we had to go fast to do that and just to kind of give you guys some baseline essentials. So if you have any questions, next slide, please reach out. We have our contact here. Each of our email addresses are there. Our phone number is also there. Our website, we have two websites, theprepgroup.com and also portviewpreparatory.com. More contact information and more resources are available on both of those as well. So I'm sorry that we went right to 2:01, but we thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing information. Really, really appreciate it. I was literally texting colleagues saying you have to push this series out as the recorded version because it's that good. Really, really appreciate your expertise, your time, your preparation, and all of this, and just really being genuine educators to support all of our kids. For those of you watching, please tune in February 11th and March 11th, which will be the next two sessions with Eddie and Melora, extending on what they've already presented today. If you have registered for the series as a whole, you'll be receiving that ongoing communication regarding the link and the next session, so you'll get those follow-up reminder emails. If you don't have that or need support, Janelle, if she hasn't already, is going to drop her email in the chat, and she's our main contact for all of that registration. And I'm just going to double check. She doesn't have anything else in here. Oh, to check your junk mail, be sure to check there in case the links have been going through Eventbrite in your junk mail instead of your regular inbox. So again, thank you so much. The Padlet is there. We'll upload the latest resources to that, and we hope to see you at our next session. Thank you. And thank you again, Eddie and Melora. Fantastic.
Of course.
Thank
Thanks for having
you.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and answering our questions also.